Our State of the Program series continues with the team that was shut out of the college football playoff this past year, missed their bowl game, opted out, and now they are back better than ever in 2026, saying that this could be Marcus Freeman's best team yet in his short time as the head coach at Notre Dame. This is our State of the Program series on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish as they prepare for the 2026 season. Hello, everyone. I'm Lucas Hill here of the Southern Sports Scene. Make sure you guys do me a favor, hit the like, share, and subscribe down below. Turn on the bell notifications so that you are notified every time we go live, post a new video or post a new short here on the Southern Sports Scene. And as always, we want to thank our friends over at Frost Buddy. If you want to get the latest in all things, tumblers, mugs, whatever it is that you want to fill your respective beverage up with, use our link below. Use code SSS15 to get 15% off your first purchase. Also, if you want to get the day started with a nice, refreshing, hot cup of coffee, but you hate the high sugars that are involved in it, use our friends at Chike Nutrition. Use the link below to get 10% off of your first purchase. Bryan Driskell of Irish Breakdown joining us, covers all things Notre Dame athletics. Coach, good to see you, sir. How are you this fine afternoon?
I'm doing wonderful. It's snow finally melting off the ground, so I'm doing good.
Well, we're starting to getting back into the 70s in South Louisiana, so it's about to get creeping back up into scorching hot temperatures here.
It was 40 this week, so I went outside in shorts and a T-shirt.
I wish.
Warming up.
I wish.
Warming up. Yeah.
Coach, obviously looking back at last year for Notre Dame, I thought that was a young team, a team that struggled with injuries at times throughout the year, but you're able to bounce back off of an 0-2 start. Defense struggled, and probably one of the more improved teams at the end of the season. Really dominated the last 5 games of the season. Just talk to me about the progression of that team after the 0-2 start and what changed once you guys got into the months of October and November.
Well, it was finally just living up to what the team should have been. I mean, I think the frustration with the first 2 games was you didn't play Notre Dame football. You know, I mean, you look at teams that had success against Carson Beck. They're teams that pressure him. They're teams that get after him, force him into mistakes, get him throwing him off his back foot, force him to speed up his reads. And then you watch Notre Dame, a team that had been very aggressive the previous 2 years under Al Golden, and they're sitting back, playing read and react, you know, letting guys kind of run. And then when they would check to man, they would check the man against bunch. It's like, well, that's when you should be playing zone. So it just was like there was a lot of stuff that just didn't make sense. And you're like, gee, why can't we cover Malachi Toney? Because you're trying to play man and bunch stuff, and they're just running a lot of mesh stuff on you. And it just was frustrating to watch it. The offensive line played poorly. And at the end of the day, they've got the ball in the end of the game, and it's, you know, down 3, and you've got a minute left to try to go do something, and they just couldn't get it done. And then the next week, you know, you play, or the next game, you play Texas A&M, and your defense takes an even bigger step back. You know, you score 40 points and lose. You give up a 3rd and long conversion on the last drive because you have just a pass interference penalty that wasn't even on the guy that was targeted. Not that I'm complaining about the call. It was a legitimate pass interference, but it was more like, why were you interfering on that play? And then, of course, the 4th down conversion that they had, 4th and goal from, I think, the 11 that they convert. And that was only wins the game because you muffed the snap on the extra point attempt. So it just was one of those things where everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. You know, blown coverage assignments, you know, muffed extra points, turnovers that result in scores for the other team. And it was just and then you still look at it and you're like, you lost by 1 to a playoff team at home, and you lost by 3 to a playoff team on the road. They start kind of putting it together against Purdue offensively. Defense doesn't really get together until Arkansas, and from that point on, they rolled. I mean, they won their last 10 games, and the closest game they had was a 10-point win over a ranked USC team where Notre Dame missed an extra point, a field goal, and threw a pick inside the 10-yard line. So, like, even in the games where it was close-ish, it was closer to being a blowout than it was to being a game that they might have lost. They were very dominant, but that's a team we all thought they were going to be all year. And I think that was the frustration and that Notre Dame fans had, but also why Notre Dame fans wanted to be in the postseason, because they felt that if, you know, Notre Dame, the way they were playing, gets a shot at the playoffs, that they could play with anybody. And whether or not they could or couldn't, that's not something we'll always debate, but we won't really know.
Coach, you mentioned about running a bunch of bunch sets when you're playing man. Doesn't that create a lot of mesh concepts for the offense? A little banana routes that you run?
Yeah.
Too?
Well,
That's
I mean, it's I've always felt, as a offensive coach, if teams are really good with either pattern match stuff or just pure zone, that's how they handle the bunch mesh. And when you're trying to play man, I'm going to beat you with a couple crossing routes. And then when you start to overplay the crossers and try to cover it high, that's when I run the pivot routes and I come back on you. And that's exactly what Miami did.
That's
they beat
what
them on
creates
a couple
the mismatches where you put your linebackers in a bad position, or you have to bring a safety down to cover a guy like Malachi Tony.
Right. You cover him by, you're going to reroute with your linebackers. You're going to have safeties squeeze down on them. And then the corners are playing in trail position. So that way they can handle any pivot routes. And they chose not to do that. Part of it was game one under Chris Ash, and he was getting used to the personnel. A lot of Notre Dame fans have kind of used that as an explanation, but I just want to remind people, Miami also had a brand new defensive coordinator in that game as well, and he wasn't doing some of that stuff. But it was frustrating, but at the end of the day, look, I think the committee screwed Notre Dame out, but I've also said to Notre Dame fans, Notre Dame also put themselves in that position by dropping those two games. You go 1-1 in those first two games, no one's debating whether you're a playoff team or not. And so you got to handle your business. Yes, I think Notre Dame should have been in the playoff. No, I don't think Bama should have been in the playoff. But at the end of the day, you didn't handle the business you needed to handle at the beginning of the season, and that's why you got left out.
I was going to kind of briefly touch on that, but I mean, you pretty much hit the nail on the head. You and I are going to have disagreements on this, and obviously we're not going to get it resolved. That's why it's in the past. That's why I want to focus on 26 going ahead, because in my opinion, I believe that Notre Dame has the schedule in front of them, the athletes that they return in 2026, and from what you've gotten in the transfer portal, to look at 2026 and their schedule and say, how can this team possibly be locked out of the playoff for the second straight year? When you look at what they've gotten returning back in the receiving core, I think it's a very underrated group with Jaden Greathouse that should be back from injury. You have, just so many different athletes that I think CJ Carr can throw the football to. I think that Jordan Faison had a really solid year. Glad that he's not doing lacrosse to focus solely on football. I think he can do a little bit of what Horatio Fields was able to do this past year and maybe elevate himself as that number one receiver. When you look at that offense in 2026, what's the one thing that pops out to you?
I think it just the depth, and you have to ask yourself, is there anybody that's going to be as good as Jeremiah Love? No. Is there anybody that's going to be as good as Jadarian Price? Maybe not. I mean, you're going to look at the 2026 NFL draft, and there's very little doubt that the first two running backs off the board are going to be Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. Right. And so you look at it and say, okay, there's not that star power. I don't know if any of the receivers are going to be as good as what Malachi Fields was for Notre Dame last year, and who has very impressive tape. And you're seeing him climb up draft boards. Daniel Jeremiah had a mock draft out today that had Malachi Fields in the first round. As teams watch his film more and realize he didn't get the ball as much because, as you mentioned, they had Jordan Faison and Eli Raritan, who's going to get drafted at tight end, and you had the best 1-2 punch at running back in the country, and you were blowing teams out, so they weren't throwing the ball in the second half of a lot of games, so the production wasn't there. Are there individual players as good as those guys? Maybe, maybe not. We have to see. They're not proven. But it's just the depth of playmakers. It's Jordan Faison, as you mentioned, who had, 49 catches last year, 640 yards. Jaden Greathouse was their leading receiver in 2024 for a team that played for the championship. You get the portal pickups in Mylan Graham and Quincy Porter, who were big-time players who Ohio State didn't want to lose. You've got Elijah Burris coming back as a guy that Notre Dame fans or Notre Dame coaches are very high on. And the running back stepping into the mix, and Aeneas Williams is a known player. I mean, we all remember him running a sluggo on, a Penn State linebacker in the Orange Bowl, beating him for a 30-yard gain, and the next play taking an outside zone into the 5-yard line, inside the 5-yard line, setting up a touchdown. He averaged over 9 yards a carry last year. So the thing that's different about this Notre Dame team than years past is Notre Dame is in a position now where all the top programs are. It's where Georgia is. I don't know how Georgia's going to overcome that guy. Well, that's just kind of what they do. How's Ohio State going to replace this receiver? It's Ohio State. Like they've got somebody. They reload. They don't rebuild. And Notre Dame has finally entered that territory where, yes, you lost this guy, but you just reload. And Notre Dame has used the portal very effectively for that. They don't bring in big numbers, but they bring in very important pieces to the portal. And that's allowed Notre Dame to build a roster that you say, like, look, you're going to say whoever you're talking to, if you're going to say who are the top 5 most talented teams in the roster, if you don't have Notre Dame in that conversation, then I think you're missing the boat. I think that's true on offense. The question, however, Lucas, is can the offensive line finally start playing like a Notre Dame offensive line is supposed to? That hasn't been there under Marcus Freeman. Joe Rudolph's offensive lines have not played to the level that their talent should represent. Part of it's youth. Part of it's been injuries. Charles Jagasaw has been injured twice. Billy Schrouth has gone down the last 2 years. Ashton Craig's gone down the last 2 years. Part of it's that. But I think that's going to be the key is can your offensive line, can you get back to looking like O-line U? They've been good up front the last couple of years, but not elite. And I think that's going to be the driver. If the offensive line can play to its potential and play to its talent level, I think that's going to be the difference between this Notre Dame team and teams in the past where you kind of relied on Jeremiah Love just being a freak and doing some things even when the offensive line wasn't. I think that's going to be the ultimate key ingredient for Notre Dame in 2026.
I said Horatio Fields. I did mean Malachi Fields. I watched Malachi Fields at the Senior Bowl, by the way, Coach. Dude.
He's legit.
He's a dude. He probably went under the radar severely in Mobile. Well, I thought he had some really good routes that he ran in one-on-ones.
And I get why his numbers won't blow you away. He's 30-some catches, 600 yards. But if you watch him play, number one, here's something I love about him, Lucas. He averaged more catches and more yards against ranked opponents than he did against unranked opponents. When it mattered and they needed him, he stepped up and made plays. I mean, he helped spark them against Miami. He made a huge – they're down 21-7, makes a great back shoulder catch to set up a touchdown to make it 21-14. Notre Dame eventually ties it at 24 later in the game. You look at how well he performed against Texas A&M, and he was a money player in the big moments, and that's something that there was other games they didn't need him as much. And then when Greathouse went down, you mentioned Jaden Greathouse. If you look at his numbers the first 4 games, Malachi Fields, they were way better than the last 8 games because once Greathouse went down, teams started to say, okay, obviously we've got to stop the run game, but in the pass game, we've got to have an answer for Malachi Fields. And there wasn't that same kind of weapon that scared you, with all due respect to Jordan Faison and Will Pauling, that there wasn't that weapon that scared you like Jaden Greathouse did when you saw what he did to Penn State and Ohio State. So teams started focusing more of their coverage on him. And then, of course, Notre Dame just didn't throw the ball a whole lot. I mean, C.J. Carr only averaged 24 attempts a game. I mean, second to last game of the year, he only threw for 40-some yards because they were winning 21-0 before the offense ever took a snap. Because they had a pick 6 on the first drive, blocked a punt for a touchdown on the second drive, and had a pick 6 on the third drive. You're not going to throw the ball a whole lot. It was like 49-0 at halftime. So that kind of tamped the numbers down a little bit. But when you study the tape, you're like, okay, this guy was dynamic. You pop in the Pitt game, you pop in A&M, you pop in Miami, and you're like, look, he may not be getting the ball here, but he got himself open. And I think as more people dive into the film, that's why you're seeing him go up draft boards on top of what as you mentioned, a very strong performance down in Mobile.
Glad you mentioned C.J. Carr. I thought he had a really strong redshirt freshman year. He's not going to be active outside the pocket. I don't expect him to be. That's not what Mike Denbrock wants him to be, especially what type of athlete that he is. I get that he's worked with mobile quarterbacks like Jaden Daniels, who goes on to win the Heisman Trophy, and Riley Leonard, who leads you to a national championship. That's not really what C.J. Carr's game is. But when you look at his tape, what's the one thing that pops out to you when you look at that, and what's an area that he needs to improve on in 26?
As a redshirt freshman this past year, Lucas, he had great feel for a redshirt freshman.
Yes.
Now you need him to have just great feel, right? Like there's another level to that production. There's another level to, okay, I understand here's a perfect example. They're playing Stanford last game of the year. They've got 2 receivers right. Stanford's playing, they're either playing quarters or they're playing like off man. You can tell by the pre-snap look. So snap of the ball, inside slant's open, but the safety squatting on it. So he drives on the slant. CJ completes it. They convert it on 3rd and 6. That's a fine read for a redshirt freshman. He saw the guy drive and he gets the ball out quick. A more experienced CJ Carr is going to see that, but then he's going to also see right behind it the corner sinking. And he's going to know that outside slant is going to be a catch and run. So even though my inside out read is going to tell me throw the inside slant, my kind of maturity tells me, okay, yes, but I'm going to go bang that outside slant. Same game. You've got a slot fade to the right. You've got a backside comeback to the left. Based on the pre-snap read, the call is to the slot fade. But a more seasoned CJ Carr is going to see that one-on-one backside and know if I see anything front side that I don't like, I'm immediately coming backside of that comeback, where you're not going to necessarily ask a redshirt freshman to make that full field read to the backside comeback route, where a seasoned quarterback will come back to that route. So it's just kind of that type of throw.
Is it like a bang eight?
He actually would hit that a little bit. It's more, it's the route you can't see.
Right.
Where you're kind of trusting the coverage to come back to. Mm-hmm. It's about saying, yeah, I know that my first read is there, but there's that bigger play here, but then not forcing it. Those are what veteran quarterbacks do. And I think that's the thing for CJ is doing that, showing a little bit more of a grasp of being able to do all of the things. I mean, he's a real smart guy. He does, protection checks. He does audibles. He does run checks, all that kind of stuff, because he's really smart. And I think at times there was a little bit too much on his plate because of how smart he is. He could get on the board and he knows it all. But then you get out there on the field as a redshirt freshman, and when things were happening, that's the first time he'd seen that. Well, next year, Lucas, he will have seen all that stuff. Right. And so I think you just what to do in some of those situations. I mean, look, he finished top 5 in the nation in passer rating. He finished top 5 in the nation in yards per attempt. He was already pretty good last year. But that was as the complement to Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. Now you're the driver of the offense.
Right.
I think more than anything, that's the biggest thing. But the good news is you're working with an offensive coordinator who has great success with quarterbacks in year 2. You look at the jump Desmond Ridder made in year 2. You look at the jump that Jaden Daniels made in year 2. And I think that's the thing we've seen from Mike Denbrock is when you have a year running his system under your belt, that next year is really dynamic. And that's what people are expecting from CJ Carr this year.
From what I've noticed from them, it's kind of a read and react type of offense that they run, especially once you get a year under your belt.
How so?
So kind of like you mentioned a little bit on just reading coverages. Mm-hmm. It's like you're taking what the defense is giving you again. Now, I know that's kind of standard for a quarterback to kind of learn in, but I noticed it a lot more in Denbrock's offenses because it feels like a quarterback kind of has more range to kind of –
yeah.
If that makes any sense.
It does. Well, because they do a lot of horizontal stretch stuff. And so a lot of stuff they do is kind of like, to your point, it's like, okay, I'm running this route, I'm running this route, I'm running this route. And it goes together, but there's a little bit more freedom to say, okay, yes, the route is meant to have this progression, but a more experienced quarterback will see that I've got leverage here. So even though my read should take me to the 6-yard option route, I'm going to hit that, that outside go route because I see that safety's cheating over inside or he's got his eyes inside. So it'll take me to your point. So there is more of that freedom to maybe not necessarily go to what that number one read is. Where if you're in more of like a, an air raid or you're in more of a spread offense, like when your number one read is there, you're taking your number one read. This is more of a pro style offense, which to your point, I agree with when you explain it, is you have more freedom to go somewhere else if you like the matchup, if you like the leverage, if you like the release, to where, yes, my read on the chalkboard tells me I should go here, but I think we've got something bigger there. I don't know how much you want to ask a redshirt freshman to do that. Right. Same thing with Jaden Daniels in 2022. But then that next year, when Jaden has more of an understanding of where people are going to be, you'd see Jaden Daniels throw blind. I mean, and that you didn't see in 2022. You'd see him look slot fade, and then he's just throwing blind backside on the dig route to Bryan Thomas because he knew now there's a trust that I know what's there. This guy can't be there because I see him taking away the slot fade, so I'm coming back. Now, by throwing blind, I don't mean he just went like this and threw it backside, but you're coming back to it ready to throw.
Correct.
Is what I mean by that. And you didn't see that as much in 2022 because you're still learning the way that Mike Denbrock processes. And so I think that's a very fair way of putting it, where you just need that experience. I don't care how smart you are, you need that game experience to be able to do that. And you think Jaden Daniels had a whole lot more game experience than CJ Carr had. He was a 3-year starter at Arizona State. So I certainly think that's the case, but bigger picture, it's just like you're going to have to carry the team more this year. You don't have Jeremiah Love to rely on. You don't have Jadarian Price. And while I think the Notre Dame running backs are still talented, they're not Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. So how do you become an elevator? I think the best quarterbacks are elevators, right? They elevate people around them. You didn't ask CJ to do that last year. He did to a degree, but overall, he didn't carry the team. This year, he's going to have to be responsible more for carrying the team.
Dude, you are picking a former defensive lineman's brain right now, dude. This is what I like to have, like actual football talk. We break down plays, we get on the board, we dissect it, and we get a better look at what a specific player's intangibles are and what they bring to a respective offense or defense. Going to the defensive side of the ball for Notre Dame. Again, like you mentioned, the slow start for Chris Ash's defense. What does your back seven look like now? Because you've obviously lost Ben Morrison the past year. You have another All-American that's gone after this year. What is the expectation there, and what have you done to, whether it be through the portal or through recruiting, who are kind of the next dudes up in that back seven?
Well, fortunately, Benjamin, he got hurt obviously in 2024, and he decided to go pro after 2024. So they returned Christian Gray at field. They returned Leonard Moore at boundary corner. Their two safeties, Tay Johnson and Adon Schuler, also both come back. Tay was a freshman All-American this year for Notre Dame. Had an outstanding rookie year. Adon Schuler obviously is a seasoned vet, has been a very good player for Notre Dame. In the past, 23, 24, and 25, the 3 previous years, Notre Dame went to the portal every year for a nickel. They got Thomas Harper out of Oklahoma State, 23. They got Jordan Clark out of Arizona State, 24. And then last year, they got Devontae Smith out of Alabama. And this year, I think that there's a chance that you're going to see them actually go in-house at nickel, whether that's Dallas Golden, who had a really good freshman year, stepping into that spot, or there's a chance they may move Christian Gray inside the slot. Because they went in the portal, got DJ McKinney from Colorado, had a bit of a rough 2025 dealing with injuries, but in 2024, playing opposite Travis Hunter, he was very good. And that's what Notre Dame is kind of banking on him playing like. They also went out and got a really talented freshman from Michigan who started a couple games this past year, Jaden Sanders, and they're 6'1", 6'2", kind of that long, rangy field corner that Notre Dame likes there to play. They do want to play more zone under Chris Ash, and so if you're going to play a lot of field zone, you want to have a little bit more of a rangy, long type of corner. And DJ McKinney can certainly do that. Jaden Sanders can do that. They've got some freshmen that can do that. They just signed the best DB class in the country in the 26 class. But and I think if you do move Christian Gray inside, it allows him to be more aggressive. He's more of a natural boundary by just his skill set. He's had to play field because you're not going to play him in the boundary when you have Benjamin Morrison and then Leonard Moore. So but I think at nickel, he can be a little bit more aggressive. So they bring back a lot. They had a very talented freshman class that had to play a lot last year. Now they're bringing in another talented freshman class, arguably the best safety in the country in Joey O'Brien. It's him and the Edwards kid going to Alabama, I thought were the two best safeties in the country last year. You got Kari Adams, who's arguably the best cornerback in the country coming in. Aiden Pouncey had a great senior year, jumped way up in the rankings. So they're restocking there, and they're very talented. They're still pretty young behind the starters, but you're going to have 3 of your 4 starting DBs or guys that started in the championship game in 24. So they're a much more seasoned team. Everybody at linebacker's back. They didn't lose anybody at linebacker. And they had a pretty darn good linebacker class last year. So Drake Bowen comes back as a 3-year starter. Jaden Osbury started for him last year. And then, of course, you've got Jalen Sneed, Kingston Asa, Mad Faremo. So back 7-wise, this is a very deep team, very long team, very athletic team. And I think that's the misconception that a lot of people still have about Notre Dame. And you go back and watch the Georgia game. Look what Georgia tried to do early against Notre Dame. They tried to run outside of Notre Dame, and it didn't work.
Right.
And I think a lot of people finally have figured out, like, dude, you can't outrun this Notre Dame team like you could in the past. You could out-athlete Notre Dame in 2012, not 2015, but 2020 and 2017. You could out-athlete them on the perimeter. You can't do that anymore to this Notre Dame team. And that's the biggest difference to what Marcus Freeman has brought is the length and athleticism that they have on defense now is just it's a different level than what it used to be. They used to have like a stud. They'd have a Kyle Hamilton.
Right.
But then the other guys were just like not guys that were ready for prime time. They were good P5 players, but not championship players. Now, Leonard Moore's a potential first-round draft pick. Christian Gray is going to be a day 2 draft pick potentially. DJ McKinney's going to be a draft pick if you stay healthy. Tay Johnson could be a day 1, day 2 draft pick. Adon Schuler is going to be a day 2 draft pick. So, the talent is there. It's just about, can you figure out how to use it? And what we saw early last year was Chris Ash trying to bring in a lot of the read and react stuff, a lot of sim pressure, a lot of showing this, but a lot of, hey, we want to keep the ball in front of us and have the linebackers fit off of the D linemen. It's like a lot of NFL type stuff. Mm-hmm. When in reality, it's like, dude, you got a very fast, aggressive, athletic defense. Starting with Arkansas and even more so against Boise State, they started to ramp the pressure numbers up big time. And once he did that, the defense just took off and just did things that we didn't see a lot of defenses do. I mean, you look at Arkansas last year, they weren't a very good team. I mean, 2-10, but they scored on everybody except Notre Dame. And that USC had a top 20 offense, top 10 offense, actually, and they held them to 24 points. And so you saw that defense played a very high level once he got a feel for what our strengths are as a defense. If he can do that again this year, I mean, the talent is there. It's a very athletic defense, very athletic edge players, very rangy athletic secondary players and linebackers. And the key is going to be, did the 2 interior portal pickups, are they hits? If they're hits, with what you've got coming back, Jason Onye being granted a 6th year, which was huge for Notre Dame. I think now you look and say, okay, now you could, because if you say you're 4 defensive linemen, then you're going to love this. Or I shouldn't love it. You're going to agree with this. I don't think you can be an elite defense if you're not strong right up the middle on all 3 levels.
Yes.
You have to be strong up the middle. If you have 2 great ends, but your D tackles are average, I'm going to run right inside of you and right at you all game. I can kick out. I can do all these type of things with the ends. But if you're not good at middle linebacker and at defensive tackle, you're not going to have a great defense.
You don't even have to duo. You don't even have to duo. You can base block it all the way. Yeah. You can run halfback draw. Easy.
I can run inside zone at you all day and just I got to figure out something for that backside end, but I can double team that backside, put my tight end backside and have some answers for you. If you're strong up the middle, then you're going to be a lot harder. Now you force teams to the perimeter more. Right. And that's where your athleticism takes over. So if Francis Brew and Tion Gray are hits and they are what Notre Dame thinks they are, then I think that's the difference between this being a really good defense, which Notre Dame is. They're a really good defense. They've been a really good defense outside of one game the last few years, one game a year the last few years. Now it's can you become an elite defense?
Right.
Where, you're great in this game, but can you shut down Ohio State? Can you shut down Texas A&M, in the game that they played this past year? Can you shut down Oregon? Can you shut down Indiana? Like the better version of it. I mean, they shut down Indiana in 2024, but I think we all agree that Fernando Mendoza gave them something that Curtis Rourke didn't.
Right.
And, I think that's still the question that remains to be seen. The talent's there. It's just you got to put it all together.
Do you expect Christian Gray to be more involved in the run game this year?
Yeah, he battled a shoulder injury last year, which has kind of limited him. If you go back and watch him in 24, he was a very good tackler. I mean, he had the 4th and 2 stop on the first drive against USC. He had that huge 3rd down stop up. I think it was Katron. No, it wasn't Katron. It was Nicholas Singleton. Came up and drilled Nicholas Singleton in the 3rd quarter to stop a 3rd down run and help Notre Dame get the ball back. So he's just got to be healthy. That's the big thing with Christian is. Because in the nickel spot, you've got to be a solid run defender and you've got to be able to take on blocks and be good at block destruction and get to the football. Otherwise, teams are going to perimeter run you to death and perimeter pass you to death and things like that. And now all of a sudden those duo bounces become big plays because your nickels get whooped. So he's going to have to look like the guy he was in 2024. And that just means being healthy. That's really going to be the big key for him.
When you look at this roster as a whole, and I've heard a lot of people say that this could be very true, do you see when it comes to August, the preseason, Paul's putting Notre Dame at number 1?
I wouldn't. Look, here's how I am. I'm a believer that you're the champs until somebody beats you, unless there's like that unique situation, like LSU in 19 and Michigan in 23. They lost a ton. I mean, LSU had like 15 guys drafted. Michigan had like 19 guys invited to the combine. LSU lost Joe Brady. Michigan's entire staff was gone. Unless there's some mass exodus, I'm a believer that you're the champs until somebody beats you. And while I think you could make a case that Notre Dame has the best roster in the country, I have a hard time putting a team that just didn't make the playoffs at number one. I just do. I think they have to earn that number one spot. And that's why I would have Indiana number one. And a lot of people are going to disagree with me on that, but I think Indiana showed this year, beating Ohio State, beating Oregon twice, beating Ole Miss, beating Miami, that they can go toe-to-toe with big-time teams and beat them. And so you can say they had weak regular season schedules, and they did, but they also had to go on the road and beat Oregon in the regular season, and they did. They had to go beat Ole Miss in the semifinal. Miami beat Ole Miss. They had to beat Oregon and Alabama. Spanked Alabama. So I think they proved last year that they're legit. And yes, they lost a lot of really good players. They still have a lot coming back. They had a great portal season. Obviously, getting Josh Hoover in, which is I'm very high on Josh Hoover. He was on my top 10 quarterbacks list last year. He's in my top 10 this year. They got a kid from Notre Dame that was a great pickup that not a lot of people are talking about. Josh Burnham at defensive end will be a monster pickup for Pat Kuntz in that defensive line. So, getting Nick Marsh out of the portal was big. You're going to pair him with Charlie Becker. So, and then, of course, they did very well in the run game, getting Turbo Richard from Boston College. He was a productive back behind a terrible offensive line at BC. You put him behind that Indiana offensive line, he's going to be a great fit there. So, that's just how I am, Lucas. If people don't agree with that, I get it, but I've been that way. I've always been that way. It doesn't make me feel good to put another Indiana team number one and not Notre Dame, but I just feel like that's a position that gets earned. Well, if they're not the best team, well, then somebody will beat them and they won't be number one anymore. But if they keep winning, then shouldn't they be number one? That's kind of the way I look at it. So I'd have Notre Dame, I have Notre Dame at number 2 in my ranking. But if somebody said, hey, Ohio State should be ahead of them, or Texas or Oregon, I'd say, okay, fine. I'm not going to argue with you on it. They're all very talented teams. But the thing I like about the 12-team playoff era is it gets sorted out. You'll get your chance on Saturdays this season to go out there and prove yourself. Well, in Notre Dame's case, 11 Saturdays and 1 Sunday, because they kick the season off on a Sunday. But you'll get your 12 chances to go out there and prove that you belong to be ranked wherever it is. And so I would not put them number one, even though I think if you were to ask me, do they have the best roster coming back? I think we could argue that they do, but I still wouldn't put them number one because of what I just said. You're the champs until somebody beats you.
Who would have known that we would have 2 teams from the state of Indiana in a potential top 3 when we talk about Indiana and Notre Dame? It just blows my mind still. Just thinking about how far Notre Dame or Indiana has come in the last 3 years of college football.
Yeah, very quickly. Yeah, Cignetti's a legit coach.
NIL works.
Well, and the big thing is I think Kurt Cignetti understands how to build a team. Because he won because of the portal. Okay, raise your hand if you predicted Indiana with all those James Madison transfers to be a playoff team in 2024.
How many people predicted for those of them that were between the ages of 22 and 25 winning a national title? Right.
I mean, you look at getting Fernando Mendoza. That wasn't the sexy pickup. It was a good pickup, and I like the pickup. But I think what he understands is how to build a culture and how to get the most out of your players. He understands we're in an era right now that I hate, where there's a lot of college teams that believe it's about your talent and your scheme. And I believe both of those things are very important ingredients to winning. You're not going to win a title if you don't have talent and good scheme, right? But what we're seeing more from teams is there's not enough people putting an emphasis on playing the game with technical precision and proficiency. And what we saw last year from Indiana was, as long as my talent is somewhat on the same level as yours, if we're more physical than you and we're more technically proficient than you, we can match you scheme for scheme. But our kids know how to play the game of football. When you watch Indiana and Alabama and you watch those 2 lines, one line is coached extremely well and the other's just trying to rely on having really talented players. And which one won the day? It's the team that's really well coached. Name me someone on the Indiana offensive line who's going to even remotely be drafted anywhere close to Caden Proctor. There isn't.
I initially said Pat Coogan, but then after watching the national championship and really studying his film, no.
I mean, Notre Dame let him walk. I mean, that, you know what I mean? Think about that. He was a starter on the 24 team. They let him walk. He's a great kid, great leader, but he's not the high-level NFL draft pick. Carter Smith isn't. That's why he's coming back to Indiana next year. They are coached at an elite level, and they play hard. And then they've got great scheme. And I'm not sitting there saying like he's taking a bunch of former walk-ons and turning them into elite line. You're taking good players and getting the most out of them. And I think that's what Indiana showed. And I think to a degree, that's what we've seen from Notre Dame is the last couple of years is yes, you have to have talent, but there's a way that you have to play the game to win. I think that's what we saw from Miami this year. Why was Miami better this year than in past years? Did they have were they as talented on offense in 2025 as they were in 24? I don't think they were. Outside of Malachi Toney, there was nobody on their offense that was as talented as Cam Ward and, all the receivers they had. I mean, they lost their top 7 pass catchers from the year before. Mm-hmm. Why were they better? Well, they were coached better schematically on defense, but they were dominant in the trenches last year. That's where they beat Notre Dame. They beat Notre Dame's tail in the trenches. That's why they won that game. And so I think there's still that recipe works. And I think Curt Cignetti understands that. I think Marcus Freeman understands that. And I think that's part of the reason why those two teams are so good. If you could give Texas the line play that Indiana had the last 2 years, that team's winning the title. But that's the thing holding Texas back, in my opinion. Why has Georgia beat them the last 2 years? Do they have better athletes in Texas? No. They kick their butts in the trenches. They're the more physical team. And I still think that's the recipe in college football. And the teams that understand that are the teams that are winning the most games. Or I should say the most important games.
Right. Going to be a fun season for Notre Dame in 2026. Once again, Bryan Driskell of Irish Breakdown joining us here on the Southern Sports Scene for our second of our State of the Program series. Bryan, where can we find the work?
Everywhere you go, you got to find Irish Breakdown. If you go to our YouTube channel, just type in Irish Breakdown. You'll see this logo. See right there. See that logo on our YouTube channel. If you listen via podcast, you can just type in Irish Breakdown on whatever podcast platform you listen to. And then for our free website, you can check out all of our written articles at irishbreakdown.com. Try to make it as easy as possible for you. Irish Breakdown.
Guys, thank you all so much again for watching us here on the Southern Sports Scene. Make sure you all do us a favor once again. Hit the like, share, and subscribe button down below. Turn on the bell notifications so that you don't miss another video, YouTube short, or live show that we do. Coach, we appreciate your time. Hopefully you have a great rest of the week, and we'll chat very soon.
Thanks for having me on.